Let's spend a little bit of time looking at how probability and relative frequency are related as far as what we will need for the SAT. Probability simply is the likelihood of something happening. So we use it as a ratio that we can then write as a percent or a decimal of the desired outcome to the total number of outcomes. Frequency is just how often something happens. So when we look at relative frequency, we're looking at how often something happens relative to the whole. Again, usually written as a percent, but it can be written in decimal or as a ratio. A two-way frequency table looks at two qualitative variables, one represented by row and the other one represented by columns, and gives their relative totals. So here below, we have a relative frequency table with the qualitative variables that they own a bike or do not own a bike, compared to whether or not they own a skateboard. And so the qualities of those are the variable bike with a response of yes or no, and a variable skateboard with a response of yes or no. And so with those variables, we have relative totals. All the people that own bikes, there's 15 of them. All the people that own skateboards, there's 7 of them. All the people that do not own a bike, there's 10 of them. All the people that do not own a skateboard, there's 18 of them. And there are 25 people total because some people own both and some people own neither. So how we can read a frequency table. Here, this one represents that Jackie asked his classmates whether or not they own a bike or a skateboard with the given result. How many classmates own both a bike and a skateboard? So we have to look for the column where it intersects that they own a bike, I'll use a different color, and they own a skateboard. And so we can see the intersection of those two headings is at 4. We have 4 kids that own a bike and a skateboard. Then we look at how many own a skateboard, relative or irregardless of whether or not they own a bike. So 4 people own a skateboard and a bike, 3 people own a skateboard and no bike, giving us a total of 7 people. So 7 people own a skateboard. And then how many classmates own either a bike or a skateboard, but they do not own both? So we have to look at, they own a bike, but they do not own a skateboard. And they own a skateboard, but they do not own a bike. So when we add up those two totals, we get a total of 14. And so there's other ways that we can analyze this frequency distribution, but that's kind of the basics of how we can read and interpret each individual cell. Well, how do we calculate relative frequencies? Once we can correctly identify the values we're looking for, the rest of them is just dividing two values to find a fraction, a percent of a probability. So here we summarize the concert attendance of students in Dr. Ramel and Dr. Yukovich's class. So some of the students attended the concert, some of them didn't. And Dr. Ramel and Dr. Yukovich have different numbers of students in their classes. And we can see those totals. Dr. Ramel has 31 students, while Dr. Yukovich has 33. Of all of the students, 40 of them went to the concert, 24 of them did not. And between the two classes, there are 64 students total. So we want to look at what fraction of Dr. Ramel's class did not attend the concert. So we have to identify what's the part and what's the whole, what's the total and what's the part. Well, we're looking specifically at Dr. Ramel's class. So our total is the total number of students in Dr. Ramel's class, which is this column here. And how many of those students did not attend the concert? Well, of his students, 14 of them did not attend. So we're looking for the ratio of 14 divided by 31. And we can leave it as a ratio, or we could write it as a decimal notation. So if we do the division and we take it out to 2 decimal places, we get approximately 0.045, which is approximately 45%. Then we want to look at what percentage of students from both classes attended the concert. So again, we look at the total is both classes, and then it's how many of them attended the concert. So here we're looking at the total of both classes, which is 64, and how many of them attended the concert. So we have 40 over 64, which we could simplify that ratio, but since we want to find the percent, we can just go ahead and do the division, and we get 0.63 if we round it, which is approximately 63%. Just as a side note, you'll want to make sure you pay attention to any directions as far as rounding goes, whether they say the nearest percent or the nearest tenth of a percent. If we wanted the nearest tenth of a percent, we would have to actually keep this as 6 to 5, which would then give us a percent of 62.5%. So we just want to pay attention to any rounding directions that may be present. Lastly, if a student from either class is selected at random, so that's our total, both classes. If a student from either class is selected at random, what is the probability that the student is from Dr. Yukovich's class and attended the concert? So we want the number of students in Dr. Yukovich's class and that they attended the concert, which is these 23 students here. And so we can write our probability as either 23 over 64, or in decimal notation, if we do the division, we get 0.36% or 0.36, and then as a percent notation, 36%. Now we'll refer to the table we had above with bikes and skateboards. If a classmate is selected at random, what is the probability that they do not own a bike? So a classmate is selected at random. That's going to be all students. So all students, the total is the 25. What is the probability that they do not own a bike? So we want to look at the total that do not own a bike. Well, we find the column of do not own a bike, and there's our total. So we get a probability of 10 out of 25, which can reduce to 2/5, or in decimal notation, 0.4, or as a percent, 40%. What fraction of classmates who do not own a skateboard also do not own a bike? So first we have to look at the total. Our total, those that do not own a skateboard, those that do not own a skateboard is these 18 students here. And then the part is, of that group, who does not own a bike? So of these 18 students, 7 of them do not own a bike. So we get our ratio of 7 to 18, which is approximately 0.39, or approximately 39%. Now, how can we find missing values in a frequency table? Well, we can use the proportions that are given in order to fill in missing information. If 3/4 of the students in the two classes play an instrument, okay, so 3/4 of all students play an instrument. All students is our total, while playing an instrument is our part. So we're comparing playing an instrument to total students. This goes back to our lesson on ratios and proportions. If we have a proportion that 3 out of every 4 students plays an instrument, we can look and find the total of students that play relative to the total number of students. We don't know the total number of students that play an instrument, but we do have the total number of students overall. So we can set up this proportion, and when we solve, we end up getting a value of x that equals 28. And so we know that 28 students play an instrument. Once we've got that, that's enough information to fill in what's left. Considering that 28 students play an instrument, or I'm sorry, that should be a 48. Let me go back and fix that. 48, I'll be okay. Given that 48 students play an instrument, and 20 of them are in Dr. Rammel's class, if we subtract the total by the 20 in Dr. Rammel's, we get the 28 students that play in Dr. Yukovich's class. And then given, and we can fill in the rest of the table if we needed to, given that 28 students in Dr. Yukovich's classes play an instrument, if we want to find how many don't, we can say, all right, well, let's take the total number of students subtracted by the 28 that do play an instrument, and we end up getting the 5 students that don't play an instrument. And so we're able to fill in these cells by using some basic arithmetic. Again, and if 11 students do not play an instrument and 5 students do not play an instrument, if we add these cells up, we end up getting the 16 students total. that do not play an instrument. And so then we can answer all of our questions that we may have. How many students in Dr. Yuchevich's class play an instrument? 28. How many of Dr. Yuchevich's students do not play an instrument? That's 5.